Oakland emergency, number 19.
Hi, 6th and Jefferson. A police officer just got stabbed by a homeless person.
Officer Danny Chor was off duty when a woman stabbed him in the neck. The profusely bleeding officer used his cell phone to call 911, and his repeated calls failed to connect, according to a grand jury report at the time.
Yeah, a police officer just got stabbed.
Okay.
The caller is a waste management supervisor. You're hearing her voice because not only were the officer's 911 calls failing to connect, according to the report, her employee, a garbage truck operator who drove past the scene, also tried calling 911, and his calls also could not get through. You're hearing his voice only because he's on his supervisor's speakerphone as she called 911 for him. Details about this dangerous delay were published in the Civil Grand Jury's 2019-2020 report, which was prompted by a complaint about long 911 call wait times in Oakland. In 2020, Oakland's average 911 answering time was 28 seconds, nearly double the state and national standard of 15 seconds. According to state 911 data obtained by the investigative unit, Oakland's average 911 answering time has gotten far worse. This year, it's nearly doubled to 54 seconds.
I did call 911, and the experience is absolutely horrible.
Alan Liang owns an Oakland auto shop and uses this tow yard. He says he wishes his 911 calls were picked up in 54 seconds.
When I call 911, usually you're on hold for approximately 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
10 minutes before I arrive.
10 seconds.
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Just last week, Liang called 911 to report a missing person and says he was on hold for 7 minutes. Last September, he found a crushed body in his tow yard, and this happened.
So this is where I found the dead body a while back. I immediately dialed 911. I was placed on hold for maybe about 10 to 15 minutes.
And that's after Liang says his 911 calls repeatedly failed to connect, just like what happened with the stabbed officer. In a statement to us, a city spokesperson said long wait times for 911 callers are clearly unacceptable, and that Mayor Sheng Tao has directed that 911 call taker vacancies be given top-tier priority. But just last week, in the mayor's recently approved city budget, Mayor Tao froze a full-time communication dispatcher position. When we repeatedly asked to sit down with the mayor for an interview about that decision and Oakland's 911 system, she refused.
I just feel like the city leaders are not taking this issue seriously.
According to a new civil grand jury report released last month, Oakland's 911 phone system was recently replaced. But Oakland still faces staff shortages, a record number of 911 calls, and 911 software and hardware that is so out of date, the police department is forced to buy replacement parts on eBay. Motorola has only one technician who still knows how to work on the 20-year-old software. When asked about the report, the mayor declined an interview again.
Okay, they're now waiting for the ambulance.
Okay.
An ambulance never made it to the Oakland police officer who was stabbed. He was just 2 blocks away from police headquarters. Before his 911 calls could connect, his fellow officers put him in the back of a patrol car.
Yeah, just put him in the car and they're going to take him to the hospital.
He survived, but grand jurors at the time said the 911 system's multiple failures in this situation almost cost the officer his life.
It's basically a waste of time, and I just don't dial 911 anymore.
Problems with 911. Tonight, we're talking about the city's emergency communication center going down for nearly 30 hours. This came to light thanks in part to our exclusive report. This major failure happened last Thursday through Friday and then again Saturday morning. The result of a power outage, the city says. At first, 911 calls couldn't get through. Then calls were rerouted through another agency. Oakland was able to take some calls, but dispatchers had to resort to pen and paper.
Putting the dispatchers in a position where they were again manually handwriting calls for service.
There's a 911 calling crisis.
Weeks after we revealed Oakland had the second worst answering time in California, the state sent the city this letter. It put Oakland on notice, saying it has 12 months to bring 911 answer times into compliance, or it will initiate termination of Oakland's 911 center, and OPD will no longer receive state 911 funding.
In an emergency, when you have to call 911, you trust that the system works. Most of the time in California it does, but who's keeping an eye out for 911 centers that fall through the cracks or fail altogether?
Investigative reporter Candace Wynn has been digging into government agencies that are supposed to monitor our 911 centers and found major shortcomings.
This is something where both public safety and public money are at stake. On your phone bill, you pay a 30-cent 911 surcharge. Now, 30 cents, it doesn't seem like much, but with every California phone user paying 30 cents per line every month, it all adds up to nearly $200 million last year alone. We found as this money continues to balloon, the agency in charge of managing it is falling behind.
"911 calls going to busy signals.
Unbelievable.
Others just ringing and ringing.
I called the police so they could help me, but they didn't answer.
Ringing, nobody answering.
Frustration with out-of-control crime. One man even rammed his tow truck into an SUV to save a woman from an armed robbery.
No one should have to live in fear in America.
California's mandatory standard is to answer emergency calls within 15 seconds in order to receive state 911 funding. But Oakland's average answering time, we found, is nearly a minute long, the second worst in the state. Last year, Oakland had more than 50,000 abandoned 911 calls, meaning people called but hung up before an answer. That number doubled from the year before.
Extortions, vandalism, prostitutions, drugs.
We first spoke with Alan Liang just weeks ago about Oakland's crime and 911 calling system crisis. Driving through East Oakland, Liang says he has since closed his auto shop.
I had a staff that actually got carjacked right in front of the shop. We didn't even make 911 call because we already know what's going to happen. You know, you're going to be on hold for 10 minutes.
When it comes to regulating 911 centers, the buck stops locally. Multiple civil grand jury reports hold both current and former Oakland officials responsible for the city's communication center's downfall.
Oakland police are experiencing catastrophic CAD failures at this time.
Although state and federal agencies generally can't take enforcement action, they are supposed to monitor 911 centers. The state's own operations manual says it's a mandate, which isn't being carried out, we found.
Oakland emergency number 19.
In its regular performance report to the California Office of Emergency Services, or Cal-OES, Oakland said it received 1,200 911 calls this past February, then 0 calls in March, and then nearly 27,000 in May. Adding to the city's confusing numbers to the state, this recent civil grand jury report says Oakland received over 1 million 911 calls last year. But to Cal-OES, the city reported just a quarter of that.
That certainly is concerning. One of the things we need timely, accurate data.
Brian Ferguson is Cal-OES's spokesperson.
That's part of our role in the government, is to closely monitor what's happening all across the state.
If you don't have accurate data, what's at stake?
Everything. Public safety. Knowing what's happening in the field, to the public, to your loved one on the street. Decisions are so often made by data.
But what is Cal-OES doing to enforce proper reporting?
So we have some ability to, to push and pull as a service function, but ultimately that's going to come down to locals. It's their responsibility to provide timely, accurate data and also to serve the public.
Then what's the point of a mandate or a standard if time and time again it is not met or enforced?
There is follow-up that's needed, it sounds like, in order to make sure that folks get the support they need.
Over the past decade, Californians paid more than $1 billion into our 911 systems through taxes and that 30-cent 911 surcharge on our monthly phone bills. Since the governor made updating 911 technology a priority in 2018, state 911 costs have skyrocketed. Through oversight, Cal OES is supposed to make sure that money is distributed fairly and also to make sure it isn't wasted. We found Cal OES has reporting issues of its own. In its recent 911 fee report to the Federal Communications Commission, Cal OES said it conducts a fiscal and operational review of all 911 call centers in California on average about every other year. But we found that's not the case. According to this Cal OES report last month, it's only completed 22 reviews so far this year, 2 all of last year, and 0 in 2021. This is out of roughly 440 emergency call centers statewide. For weeks, we tried following up with Cal OES about its gap in reviews, but the agency never got back to us. When we reached out to the FCC, a spokesperson said the FCC does not oversee how 911 call centers are regulated under state law. The FCC issues a survey to the reporting jurisdictions, but cannot compel reporting jurisdictions to provide all information requested.
What's your emergency?
Hello, this is Oakland.
As for Oakland, for more than 2 months and after more than a dozen emails and calls to all of these Oakland officials, none of them agreed to sit down with the investigative unit and talk about the city's 911 problems. They cited a formal civil grand jury response process they say they need to follow. But with thousands of 911 callers impacted by this problem every month,
Mayor Tao, nice to have you back on the program.
our Raj Mathai raised the issue with Mayor Sheng Tao during an interview in a recent newscast.
Obviously, long wait times for 911 callers are clearly unacceptable, and my administration will be tackling this inherited issue with urgency. This is not anything new.
I've been sitting here for at least 8 minutes. I can't imagine that nobody has called you guys.
Yeah, we have the call. That's why 911's been backed up.
I do apologize for the delay, sir.
They're making the city like it's a joke. That's how I feel.
Outside of individual jurisdictions, there is no state or federal government regulation of 911 centers. They are locally enforced and, as a result, operationally fragmented. All while every year the state both collects and determines how much we pay into this system through our phone bills every month.
It is a long-standing issue that has put many lives at risk. Now, Oakland says it is finally moving forward to address its failing 911 calling system. This action after multiple NBC Bay Area investigations and a grand jury report.
Investigative reporter Candace Nguyen uncovered many of these issues earlier this summer for us and joins us now in the newsroom. Candace.
Yeah, that's right. The investigative unit has been spotlighting Oakland's 911 problems since July, revealing dangerously long call wait times and people losing trust in the 911 system amid a budget deficit. Today, Mayor Sheng Tao said the city is fast-tracking millions of dollars to bring 911 answering times down. After more than 2 months of unanswered emails and calls from the investigative unit to all of these Oakland officials about the dire state of the city's 911 system, a major announcement Monday.
Thanks to additional revenues collected this year, we are able to direct an additional $2.5 million over the next 2 years to strengthen our 911 response.
Surrounded by the city administrator and city council members, Mayor Sheng Tao said the $2.5 million investment will directly support 911 staffing and system upgrades. In addition to a recent civil grand jury report blasting current and former Oakland officials for their outdated and understaffed 911 center, in July we told you Oakland has the second worst average 911 answering time in the state. At nearly a minute long, it's quadruple the state's standard.
Will these changes bring down the 911 answering times in Oakland? And if they will, when?
Absolutely. Everything that we're working towards is to really bring down that and closing that gap. I wish that it would be tomorrow. We know that systems don't change overnight.
Help me understand, why did you freeze a full-time dispatcher position in your latest city budget?
That position was actually an HR situation that happened, and so it actually did not impact at all any of the call services. We are adding more positions.
Yesterday, the investigative unit told you about more than 50,000 abandoned 911 calls in Oakland last year, meaning callers hung up before an answer. We also told you how inconsistent Oakland has been reporting 911 data to the state. For example, the city reported 1,200 911 calls last February, 0 calls in March, and then nearly 27,000 in May. Oakland City Administrator said the problem was brought to his attention.
And we appreciate those individuals that have brought that up to the fore to make sure that we're improving on a consistent basis, not just from a technological or recruiting standpoint, but also from a reporting perspective.
With a $2.5 million additional investment into Oakland 911, Mayor Tao says this is how she's moving her city forward on an issue she's personally experienced.
It's really frustrating that when I called 911, I got the busy signal. And so for me, I take this very seriously.
5 years ago, Jess, Oakland spent millions of dollars to upgrade its 911 technology to make sure that it's faster and more efficient. But the city never followed through. They never actually installed that software. While it continues to sit unused, Oakland, we found, has the worst 911 response times out of any city and county in California.
Oakland emergency number 19.
Oakland officials got an early warning in 2020 by a civil grand jury. Software to update its 20-year-old 911 computer dispatch system was purchased in 2018, but implementation was delayed. This year, another civil grand jury report saying the purchased technology is still perpetually delayed, and the city risks a catastrophic failure where dispatchers will be back to paper and pencil. That actually happened in July. The city blamed it on a power outage.
Oakland Fire and Oakland Police are experiencing catastrophic CAD failures at this time.
Response times have been a long-standing issue.
Oakland Mayor Sheng Tao and other city officials, including City Administrator Justin Johnson, teamed up for a press conference recently to respond to 911 concerns, highlighted in multiple reports by our investigative unit. Johnson said the city is still working to install the software that's critical to connecting emergency responders to a scene of a call.
This effort will provide, through a change order to an existing contract, an accelerated 6-month launch for the upgraded CAD system.
If the recent grand jury report is correct, that new 911 software was purchased by the city back in 2018. Is that acceptable in all the public funds that were spent?
I can't speak to what happened in 2018. What I can say is that our mayor and council and our leadership team is working aggressively to ensure that what we're doing now, we're taking a day-forward approach.
How much did that technology cost back in 2018?
I apologize, I can't answer that question right now.
According to the 2020 civil grand jury report, Oakland City Council had authorized $12.8 million to install the new 911 public safety IT system. The delayed upgrade is now costing taxpayers even more, an extra $150,000 according to Oakland.
You know, what's happened in the past, it's certainly there. But at present, we're going to keep moving aggressively to ensure that the implementation schedule that we have with respect to commitment to these funds, it happens expeditiously.
Well, when our investigative unit exposed Oakland's dangerously long 911 response times, the city said staffing was the main cause. Well, now we're finding out Oakland only has itself to blame.
Investigative reporter Candace Wynn has been leading our 911 coverage and joins us with this major mistake. Candace?
Yeah, after our investigations, as well as 2 civil grand jury reports, City Council member Janani Ramachandran did a deep dive into Oakland's 911 dispatcher hiring process. She is telling us now she found Oakland's Human Resources Department failed to process dispatcher applications for an entire year. Now, despite the need to fill several dispatcher vacancies, Ramachandran says from April 2022 to April 2023, the city's HR department missed out on about 1,000 submitted applications. At one point, they got as many as 362 applications a month. As a result, open dispatcher positions were left vacant as the city's emergency response continued to fail, we've been telling you, leaving thousands of 911 callers hanging on the line, sometimes for 10, 15, even 20 minutes, the council member says. Now, even when the department discovered the problem, Ramachandran says staff still failed to properly follow up with those candidates.
The fact that almost 1,000 applicants never had the opportunity to even progress forward in the hiring process, that their applications for the most part were not processed, and that they never even got a response from the city, that aspect really shocked me.
Was this negligence?
I will frame it as human error because I'm not exactly sure what's gone on. And to me, I do believe that in order to move forward, we have to acknowledge the wrongs that have been conducted in the past.
In some life and death situations, it's dangerous to call 911, and texting is the safer option. In other cases, texting is the only option. But Candace Wynn of our NBC Bay Area station in California reveals a major problem with our emergency texting system.
I was born into a family of 2 deaf parents. They immigrated from Asia looking for a better life.
Growing up in Union City, Gabriella Wong lived between 2 worlds, the deaf and the hearing.
It wasn't until I went to preschool, kindergarten, where the teacher was talking to me and I was signing back. I had no idea what they were saying.
Although American Sign Language was her first language, Wong can hear in a society with so much sound. Wong has had to be her parents' ears, especially in emergencies.
My dad, he was having a gallbladder rupture.
I was teaching, and the pain was making me literally bend over.
He texted me to call 911 for him, but I was not near my phone at that time.
So I decided to drive myself to the emergency room. The doctor said that if it had ruptured, I could have died.
8 years later, Dr. William Wong, a math professor at Ohlone College, still gets overwhelmed thinking about that drive.
It's emotions, yeah. It's the memory. It's terrible.
My dad pays the same amount of taxes, pays the same amount into government services as his next-door neighbor, but he does not have that vital access to 911, and that's not fair.
Since her father's emergency, California has added a text feature to 911 for life and death situations where a person can't call.
Emergency dispatcher 91.
By 2021, state law required all 911 centers to accept emergency texts. More than 95,000 911 texts were received that year. But in Wong's pursuit to bridge this access gap for the deaf community, she discovered another serious problem.
A lot of people don't realize that when they send a text message to 911, 911 does not necessarily know exactly where they're located.
Without knowing the location, nothing else can happen.
Mark Fletcher is Vice President of Public Safety at 911 Inform, a company that helps emergency response teams with location data.
Well, what if I'm texting 911? Does that dispatcher get the same geolocation information as quickly?
Absolutely not.
Fletcher says when you call 911, there's constant data flowing between your phone and a cell tower, helping that tower locate you. But when you text, the data is a snapshot in comparison. Your text first gets forwarded to a separate entity called a text control center, which then tries to communicate with your cell phone carrier to then try and establish your location. These extra connections can mean extra time wasted.
This problem doesn't just impact the deaf community. There are emergencies where calling 911 can be dangerous, and texting is the safer option. For instance, in a domestic violence situation or an abduction where the victim has no idea where they are.
California is actually one of the leading places in the entire country in access and functional needs support.
Brian Ferguson is the spokesperson for Cal OES, the state agency that oversaw the funding and rollout of text to 911 in California.
We understand that being vulnerable or being disabled, being older, maybe speaking English as a second language, that shouldn't change your ability to receive services in a time of crisis.
If I'm deaf, let's say, and I text 911, will that dispatcher immediately know where I am?
Let me check on that. I believe the answer to that is yes, but let me double check on that for you and we'll get you an answer.
In a follow-up email, Ferguson said it is accurate to say that with current technology, text to 911 does not offer the same level of location accuracy as in voice calls. The key thing we want the public to remember is call if you can, text if you can't. The motto has become a campaign statewide and beyond. Some in the deaf community say they feel discouraged by this messaging, even disrespected.
The government officials need to have a change of attitude and respect for the deaf community.
We need to fix this problem now because people are dying and have lack of access.
Refusing to wait for a government fix, Wong founded Access SOS. Her tech nonprofit has created an app which has already rolled out in Berkeley, California and Santa Fe, New Mexico.
We're going to press report emergency.
The Access SOS app determines where you are through Wi-Fi or phone data, and after a few more clicks to streamline information gathering,
From here, we can go ahead and press contact help.
It creates a message to send to 911.
Details like emergency location, latitude, longitude, the type of help you need.
Wong's introduced her solution to the deaf community, where it's received huge reactions.
BLESSING. Blessing.
This is so impressive, really easy.
The best reaction, though, from her father.
My wife and I are so grateful for her. She's great, and our community so needs this.
Cal OES has a contract with a third-party location service that's supposed to address this geolocation problem. We found even though 911 centers in California have access to this service, not every center actually uses it.
Just over a week ago, our investigative unit's 911 testing investigation made national headlines. That story found that the technology can't always locate you, and the problem disproportionately impacts the deaf. Investigative reporter Candace Wynn joins us now with a new announcement, and this time it's from the FCC, Candace.
That's right, Jess. The Federal Communications Commission says it's considering several accessibility solutions. They're meeting this Thursday to talk about possible new rules to address emergency services problems we told you about in our recent report, as well as other issues. This announcement came from FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosen-Worcel. This is something the FCC has been working on. Although it doesn't directly relate to 911, the discussions will be about solving emergency communication accessibility issues. The chairwoman said they're trying to make sure people with disabilities can communicate through IP-based services such as video communications and messaging services. This would help address a problem we uncovered with our text to 911 system in California and across the country. When you text 911, the system can take longer to locate you compared to voice calls. For some, like the deaf, texting is their only option, and they rely on third-party applications to get life-saving help. We spoke to Tina Trong, who's hard of hearing. She says not having full access to emergency services impacts her every day.
Over the years, I choose to stay home instead of going out because knowing that I don't have access to 911, I cannot get help as needed.
So if I see other people in trouble, I can't call 911 and help them. I would like to feel like I'm part of this community, feel empowered.